The wind came first, dry and sharp, cutting across the open street like it had a mind of its own. It carried dust, old smells, and the quiet weight of a place that had seen too many people pass through without staying. The woman stood at the edge of the old West town with a single suitcase at her feet, her dress pale against the dark wood of the buildings. She had traveled far on forgotten trails, and every step had taken something from her. Now she stood still, as if the land itself was asking whether she truly belonged. She had lost more than miles along the way. She had buried years, hopes, and the last soft parts of her life somewhere back east. Out here, there was no one to ask how she was feeling. The frontier did not care. Frontier life demanded strength, silence, and the kind of patience that came from knowing no one would save you unless they chose to. She held herself straight anyway, hands worn but steady, eyes searching the quiet street. The rancher watched from the porch of the weathered building across from her. He had been there long enough to know when someone carried more than a suitcase. He wore his hat low, his jacket faded by sun and seasons, boots marked by dust and work. His life had been shaped by Western survival, by long days and longer nights, and by the absence of voices that once filled his home. He had learned not to ask questions unless he was ready for the answers. The town around them felt paused. A rocking chair creaked in the slow breeze. Somewhere a screen door tapped softly, opening and closing like a tired breath. The old West town had been built on hard promises and harder truths. People came seeking land, work, or escape, and most found something different than what they imagined. The woman took a step forward, then another. Each one felt heavier than the last. She had been told the rancher might have work, or at least a place to rest for a night. She had not been promised kindness. She had learned not to expect it. Still, she walked toward him, because there was nowhere else left to go. When she stopped in front of the porch, the rancher straightened. He did not smile, but his eyes softened in a way that came from understanding quiet pain. He had known loss, too, the kind that stayed long after the ground settled. She spoke carefully, her voice steady but thin from travel and worry. She explained where she had come from without naming it and why she could not return. She did not speak of betrayal or graves or long nights spent praying for morning. She only said she was tired and needed a chance. The rancher listened without interrupting. In the Wild West love story of his own life, love had once come quickly and left too soon. Since then he had built walls made of work and routine. Yet standing before him now was a woman who carried the same quiet strength he saw in the land itself. Children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere down the street, then disappeared as quickly as it came. It reminded him of a time when his home had not been so still. He shifted his weight, the boards beneath his boots groaning in recognition. She hesitated, then asked the question she had been holding back since she arrived. She asked where she would sleep. The words were simple, but they carried everything. They held fear, hope, and the risk of being turned away once more. She kept her eyes on him, ready for any answer. The frontier had taught her that rejection was often quiet and quick. For a long moment, the rancher said nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. He looked past her, down the dusty road that led away from town, toward the hills that framed his land. Those hills had seen him work, grieve, and survive. They had never judged him, but they had never comforted him either. He thought of the empty room in his house, the one he kept clean without knowing why. He thought of the winters that came hard and the summers that burned without mercy. He thought of the Native American tale an old friend once told him about paths crossing for a reason, even when the reason was not clear at first. At last he spoke. His voice was low, steady, shaped by years of wind and silence. He did not give her the answer she expected. He did not offer the barn or the floor. He did not speak of a single night. His words were plain, but they opened something neither of them had planned for. Her breath caught, and she felt her life tilt just slightly, like the world had shifted under her feet. She tightened her grip on the suitcase, unsure whether to set it down or keep holding on. She had come prepared to survive another night, not to imagine a future. The rancher watched her closely now. He saw the way her shoulders stiffened, the way hope tried not to show itself in her eyes. He knew better than to promise more than he could give, yet something in him refused to turn her away. The town seemed to listen, holding its breath. Even the wind softened, as if waiting to hear what would happen next. Somewhere beyond the buildings, the land stretched wide and open, full of work, danger, and the faint possibility of belonging. She stepped onto the porch slowly, her boots echoing against the wood. This place was not yet home, but it was no longer just a stopping point. The line between survival and something more had blurred. Neither of them spoke again. They stood there, bound by a choice just made and the many consequences still unseen. The Wild West love story had not begun with romance, but with a question and an answer that carried weight. As the sun dipped lower, shadows lengthened across the street and the quiet of the old West town deepened. Whatever waited beyond this moment would demand courage from them both. And as she finally set her suitcase down, the sound echoed like a promise or a warning, neither of which could be taken back. She did not move at once after setting the suitcase down. The porch boards felt unfamiliar beneath her feet, like a place that belonged to someone else's life. The rancher stepped aside and opened the door, not rushing her, not gesturing her forward. He let the choice remain hers. That alone unsettled her more than being ordered inside would have. The house smelled of wood, dust, and something faintly warm, like bread baked long ago. It was clean but spare. Nothing sat where it did not serve a purpose. A single lamp rested on a small table, its light low and steady. The walls held no pictures. The silence inside felt older than the building itself. She stepped in slowly, each movement careful. The door closed behind her with a soft sound that carried more weight than it should have. Outside was the open frontier. Inside was a space shaped by a man who had learned to live without expecting comfort. He showed her where she could wash her hands and face, then pointed toward the empty room at the end of the hall. He did not explain it yet. He only said she could rest there for now. His words were measured, as if he feared saying too much might undo something fragile. When he left her alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms together. The mattress dipped under her weight, a small reminder that she was real, that this was happening. She had slept in wagons, borrowed corners, and once beneath a bridge when the weather turned cruel. This room, simple as it was, felt dangerous in a different way. It invited hope. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, remembering how she had arrived at this place. Years ago she had stood in another doorway, younger then, waiting for a promise to be kept. It never was. The man who made it chose land over love, silence over truth. When sickness came, it took what little remained. She buried her family under soil that never felt deep enough, then walked away with nothing but grief and resolve. Out here, frontier life offered no mercy for the weak or the grieving. Women were expected to endure quietly or disappear. She had endured. Yet each mile west had carved something out of her, leaving her wary of kindness that came without explanation. In the kitchen, the rancher stood still for a long moment after she disappeared down the hall. He rested his hand on the table, fingers rough and scarred. This house had known laughter once. A woman's voice had filled it, and small footsteps had followed. Then one winter took more than the land ever had. Since then, he had learned to keep his world narrow. He had stayed on his ranch when others left. He had survived drought, sickness among his cattle, and men who believed taking was easier than earning. Western survival demanded hard choices. Turning her away would have been the easiest one. Instead, he poured water into a tin cup and drank slowly, listening to the night settle around the house. The land outside stretched wide and unforgiving. Coyotes cried somewhere far off. Tomorrow would bring work, and with it, questions he had avoided for years. The next morning came early. Pale light crept through the windows, and the house stirred reluctantly. She woke before the sun fully rose, habit shaped by years of uncertainty. She washed quietly and stepped into the kitchen, unsure of her place. He was already there, boots on, hat resting on the table. He nodded once, not unfriendly, not familiar. He set a plate before her without comment. Simple food, but enough. She thanked him, and the sound of her own voice startled her with how soft it was. They ate in near silence. Each sound felt loud in the stillness. She noticed the way he watched the window more than her, as if expecting trouble to appear from the horizon. She understood that look. It belonged to people who had learned the land could turn against them without warning. After breakfast, he explained the boundaries plainly. Work would be expected if she stayed. The town had eyes, and not all of them were kind. People talked when things did not fit their narrow ideas of right and wrong. He would not lie for her, but he would not offer her up either. She listened, nodding. Social boundaries in the Old West were as dangerous as storms. A woman without a clear place invited judgment. A man who sheltered her invited suspicion. She did not ask how long she could stay. She knew better than to press where trust had not yet formed. Later, she walked the land with him. The ranch stretched farther than it looked from the road. Dry earth cracked beneath the sun, grass stubborn but thin. He showed her where the water ran low in summer and where the ground turned treacherous after rain. He spoke of the land the way some spoke of family, with respect and caution. As they walked, she felt the distance between them shift, not close but defined. They shared silence without filling it. She learned his rhythm, the way he paused to listen, the way his eyes tracked movement even when his face remained calm. They passed an old marker at the edge of the property, worn and half buried. He stopped there longer than necessary. She did not ask why. She sensed it marked more than land. In town, whispers began before the week ended. A woman staying alone on a ranch raised questions. Some remembered her arrival, the suitcase, the quiet way she carried herself. Others remembered the rancher's past and wondered what he thought he was doing. A man at the general store watched her too closely. Another lingered near the fence line at dusk. The frontier held dangers that did not always announce themselves. She felt it in her bones, the same way she felt storms before they broke. At night she lay awake listening to the house settle, to his footsteps moving somewhere beyond the wall. She wondered what answer he had given her that first day and whether it could truly be trusted. He lay awake too, staring into the dark, aware that the choice he made had already begun to change things. Neither spoke of the past directly. Yet it lived between them, shaping every glance and every careful word. The land waited, patient and watchful. And somewhere beyond the hills, something unseen began to move closer, drawn by the fragile hope neither of them dared to name. The first true trouble came on a day that looked harmless. The sky was bright, the air thin and dry, and the ranch moved with its usual rhythm. She was out by the wash line, shaking dust from a blanket when she felt it, a hush in the birds, a stillness that did not belong to morning. She turned and saw a rider at the far edge of the property, sitting too straight, watching too long. The horse shifted, impatient. The rider did not wave, did not call out. He only stayed there, a dark mark against the pale land, as if measuring what he could take. When she stepped back toward the house, the rider finally moved on, slow and unhurried. It was the kind of leaving that felt like a promise. She told the rancher that evening. She tried to make it sound small, like a passing look, but her voice betrayed her. He listened without showing surprise, yet his jaw tightened as if he had already expected it. He asked what the man looked like, how he sat his horse, which direction he rode. She answered, and the rancher nodded once, then went quiet. After that, he checked the fence lines more often. He kept his rifle closer, not in plain sight, but near enough to reach without thinking. He did not say he was worried, but his silence changed. It grew sharper, full of listening. She watched him from the doorway one evening as he stood in the yard with the fading light on his face. He looked like a man carved out of the land itself, steady and worn. Yet she could see the strain underneath, the way his shoulders carried weight that was not only work. She wanted to ask what he feared. Instead, she asked if she was causing trouble for him. He did not answer at first. His eyes stayed on the horizon. Then he said low and plain that trouble came whether you invited it or not. He said the land drew men like that, men who believed anything unattended was theirs. And he said something else, quieter, almost like he meant it for himself more than for her. He said he had learned the cost of letting fear make choices for him. That night she sat at the kitchen table mending a torn shirt while he cleaned tack in silence. The lamplight made the room feel smaller, softer. Every now and then their hands moved at the same time, reaching for something, then pulling back. It was a small dance of distance and closeness, like they were both afraid of stepping too far into something they could not undo. She found herself studying his hands, the scars across his knuckles, the blunt strength in his fingers. Those hands had held reins, tools, and grief. She wondered what they had held in gentler days. He looked up once and caught her staring. For a moment neither moved. The air between them tightened, filled with things neither said. She lowered her eyes quickly, ashamed of how much she wanted to know him, how much she wanted to be known. In town, the whispering grew louder. The preacher's wife watched her with a tight smile. A man at the saloon laughed too loudly when the rancher passed. And then there was the woman who ran the boarding house, older, sharp-eyed, who pulled her aside near the well and spoke in a voice meant to sound kind. She said a woman with no ring and no proper place could be swallowed by this town. She said folks would decide her story even if they did not know it. She warned her that a rancher's name carried weight, and weight drew envy. She told her the rancher had enemies, not because he was cruel, but because he kept what was his and did not bow to men who wanted more. She thanked the woman and walked away with her stomach tight. She had known these truths already, yet hearing them spoken felt like a door closing. On the edge of town, a small group of native men sat outside a trading post, quiet and watchful. One of them, older than the others, looked at her with a steady gaze that held neither welcome nor rejection, just knowing. She had heard stories of this land long before fences, long before the town, long before the rancher's house stood there. A Native American tale once told by her father had spoken of spirits that guarded water and of people who could read a storm in a stranger's eyes. She nodded politely as she passed. The older man's gaze followed her, not like the rider at the fence line, but like someone watching a path unfold. Back at the ranch, the rancher's hired hand came by with news. A neighboring ranch had lost 2 cattle, not to wolves. The tracks did not match. There were signs of men and rope. It was spoken of in low voices, with the kind of caution that came from knowing law was far away and help came late. The rancher thanked the man, then walked the property again, circling closer to the house than he used to. When he came inside, dust coated his boots and his face looked older. She asked if he thought they were next. He said he did not know. Then he added, almost against his will, that he would not let anyone take what was under his roof. The words struck her harder than he meant them to. She felt her throat tighten. Under his roof meant her. It was the first time he had claimed her presence in a way that sounded like protection. The next days brought small moments that felt too bright for such a harsh world. She worked beside him, learning the rhythm of his ranch, the way he repaired a broken hinge without complaint, the way he spoke to horses softly. Once, as she carried water from the well, she slipped on loose dirt. The bucket tilted, water splashed. Before she could fall, his arm caught her around the waist. For a breath, she was pressed against him. The scent of leather and sun surrounded her. His grip was firm, careful, as if he feared hurting her. She looked up, and his eyes were close, searching her face like he was trying to read something he did not trust himself to name. Time slowed. Her heart beat hard, loud in her chest. She felt warmth spread through her, the kind she had not allowed herself to feel since before the graves, before the long road west. Then he stepped back quickly, as if the closeness burned. He turned away, clearing his throat, picking up the bucket. She stood still, shaken by how much she had wanted him not to move. That night she cried without sound into her pillow, angry at herself, frightened by hope. Love felt possible, and that made it dangerous. She had survived by refusing to want too much. He sat on the porch long after dark, staring into the black. His thoughts were a storm. He had promised himself he would never again invite a woman into his life only to watch the land take her away. He had buried his vows in the same soil that held his dead. Yet now her presence stirred them up, like wind uncovering what was hidden. In the quiet hours, a knock came at the door. It was late enough that only trouble arrived that way. The rancher opened it with his hand near his side, ready. A boy stood there, breathless, dust on his face, eyes wide with fear. He said men were asking questions in town, men with hard smiles. Men who wanted to know why a woman had come to the rancher's place and what she was worth. The words hit like a cold plunge. The rancher's face went still, but something dark moved behind his eyes. The boy added one more thing before running off into the night. He said the rider at the fence line had been seen talking to the sheriff. Inside, she had heard enough from the hallway to feel her knees weaken. The law was not always protection out here. Sometimes it was only another hand reaching for what it wanted. She stepped into the lamplight, her face pale, her voice barely steady as she asked what they would do. The rancher looked at her, and in that look she saw the fight inside him, the wish to keep her safe, the fear of losing everything, the memory of old grief pulling at him like chains. He did not answer right away. He turned his gaze toward the window, toward the wide, dark land, as if the frontier itself held the reply. And somewhere out beyond the fence line, in the same darkness, another rider moved, quiet as smoke, closing the distance between threat and home. The rancher did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low, listening to every creak of the house, every shift of wind. She sat across from him, hands wrapped around a tin cup that had gone cold. The air between them felt tight, like a rope pulled too far. At last he spoke, voice quiet but firm. He said she could leave before morning if she wanted. He said he would not blame her. He said he could put her on a wagon headed west or south, anywhere away from this town's eyes. The offer was meant as protection, yet it landed like a wound. Her fingers tightened around the cup. She had walked too long on forgotten trails to be sent away like a burden. Still, fear stirred in her chest. She pictured men with hard smiles, a sheriff who might not care, a town that could turn cruel without warning. She pictured the rider at the fence line returning with company. She asked him if he wanted her gone. His jaw worked as if the answer cost him. He said he did not want anything that would bring danger to her. He said the land had already taken enough from him. He did not say her name, but it was there in every word. Her eyes burned. She swallowed hard and forced herself to speak calmly. She said she had already lost her family once. She said she had buried the last pieces of her old life in cold ground and walked away because she had to. She said she could not spend the rest of her days running just because men decided she was easy prey. He looked at her then, truly looked, as if he was finally seeing the whole road she had traveled. The lamplight caught the tired lines near her eyes, the stubborn set of her mouth. She was not weak. She was worn, and that was different. Outside, the coyotes called again, closer than before, or maybe it only felt that way. He rose and checked the window. The yard lay still under the moon, pale and empty. But stillness on the frontier could be a lie. Before dawn, they made choices without speaking them aloud. He saddled the horse and hitched the wagon, not to send her away yet, but to be ready. She packed her suitcase with the same care as the first time, folding her dress, wrapping small items in cloth. Her hands did not shake, but her heart did. The act of packing felt like surrender, even though she told herself it was only caution. When the sun rose, the ranch looked the same, yet everything had changed. The day carried a pressure like storm air. Even the horses seemed restless, ears twitching, hooves shifting. They went into town together. That alone was a decision. He could have sent her, kept her hidden. Instead, he brought her beside him in plain sight. It was a kind of claiming, though he would never use that word. The street was busy enough to feel normal. A man unloaded crates. A child chased a stray dog. The general store door swung open and closed, but eyes followed them. Women paused mid-sentence. Men stared too long. A hush moved through the town like wind through grass. At the sheriff's office, the rancher stopped. He stood tall, hat low, shoulders square. She stayed just behind him, close enough to feel his steadiness. Her stomach tightened as the sheriff stepped into the doorway. The sheriff was not young, not old, with a face shaped by heat and habit. His smile did not reach his eyes. He greeted the rancher like a friend, but his gaze slid past him to her, weighing. The sheriff asked the rancher what he was doing, keeping a lone woman out on his place. He asked where she had come from. He asked if she had papers, family, a husband, a preacher who could vouch for her. She felt the heat rise in her face. Old shame tried to crawl up her throat. She had spent her life doing what was expected until life broke the rules first. Now she stood in the open, judged by a town that knew nothing of her losses. The rancher answered slowly. He said she was working. He said she was under his protection. He said no harm would come to her on his land. The sheriff's smile thinned. He said protection was a fine word. Then he said a different word, one that carried threat without needing a weapon. He said trouble. He leaned on the doorframe and asked if the rancher had heard about the cattle taken from the neighboring place. He said the town was nervous. He said strangers brought questions. He said folks would blame the easiest target. His eyes stayed on her as he spoke that last part. The rancher's voice grew colder. He said if cattle thieves were the worry, the sheriff should look for thieves. He said a woman with a suitcase did not steal cattle in the night. He said if any man touched her, he would answer for it. A quiet gasp came from somewhere behind them, someone listening. The sheriff lifted his hand slightly, as if easing a horse. He said no one wanted harm. He said the town only wanted order. Then he glanced down the street. She followed his gaze and saw the rider, the same one from the fence line. He stood near the saloon, leaning against a post like he had all the time in the world. A second man stood beside him. Both watched her with the same hard patience. The rancher saw them too. His shoulders tightened, but he did not move. He said goodbye to the sheriff with words that sounded polite and meant nothing. They walked away. Every step felt watched. She could feel her own breath, quick and shallow. She tried to keep her face calm, but fear lived in her bones now. At the general store, the woman who ran the boarding house caught her arm. Her grip was gentle but urgent. She whispered that men were asking about her again, louder now. She whispered that the rider claimed the rancher was hiding something, that she was not who she said she was. She whispered one more thing, and that was the sharpest cut of all. She said the rider had a paper, and on it was a name. Her old name. For a moment the world tilted, the street blurred. Her ears rang with the sound of the past catching up. She had not spoken that name in years. She had thought it buried with the rest. Yet here it was, written and carried by a stranger like a chain. The rancher saw her face change. He asked what was wrong. She tried to speak, but her throat locked. All she could do was shake her head and keep walking. They made it back to the wagon. He lifted her up, hands firm at her waist. That touch should have steadied her, but it only reminded her what she could lose. They left town with the sun high and hard. Behind them, dust rose from other horses. She looked back once and saw riders trailing at a distance, far enough to pretend it was chance, close enough to promise it was not. The rancher drove with his jaw set. He did not look back. He kept his eyes on the road, on the shape of the land ahead. When they reached the ranch gate, he turned the wagon off the main path and took a route that cut through low brush and shallow gullies. She finally found her voice. She told him the truth she had been holding. She said the men had her old name. She said someone back east must have spoken, must have sold the story for a few coins, or sent word to someone hungry enough to chase it. She said she did not know why, only that it meant she was not just a stranger anymore. He listened, hands tight on the reins. When she finished, he stopped the wagon under the thin shade of a lone tree. He looked at her with a pain so raw it startled her. He asked what she was running from, truly. He asked what kind of past could reach this far into the frontier. Tears rose in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She said it did not matter now. She said it would only put him in more danger. He shook his head once, hard. He said it mattered because she mattered. The words came out like they had been trapped in him for years. He looked away quickly, as if ashamed of letting them free, then looked back with a steadiness that felt like a vow. She reached for his hand, slow, giving him time to pull away. He did not. His fingers closed around hers, rough and warm. For a moment the world narrowed to that touch, to the fragile truth between them. Then a sharp crack split the air. A shot, not close enough to strike, but close enough to warn. The horses reared, the wagon jolted. Birds burst from the tree in a frantic cloud. The rancher grabbed the reins and pulled them steady, eyes scanning the brush. From the low rise ahead, riders appeared, 3, then 4, spreading out like wolves. The rider from town led them, hat low, rifle resting easy across his saddle. The rancher's hand found his gun. He pushed her down behind the wagon seat and told her to stay low, voice tight with fear he could not hide. She curled down, heart hammering, dust in her mouth. She peeked through the slats and saw the men closing in, slow and sure, like they owned the land. The rancher stood in the open, alone against them, shoulders squared to danger. His eyes flicked back to her once, and in that glance she saw what he feared most. Not death, loss, and as the riders drew near enough for their voices to carry, the leader called out her old name like a weapon, smiling as if the past had finally found its mark. The rancher did not draw first. He lifted his chin and spoke, his voice steady enough to cut through the dust and fear. He told the riders to stop where they were. He told them the land was his and the woman under his roof was not for sale, not for rumor, not for old stories dragged across miles. He told them to turn around and leave. The leader laughed and said her old name again, tasting it like a victory. He said papers carried weight. He said a past could buy a future if the price was right. He said the sheriff would listen. The woman rose from behind the wagon before the rancher could stop her. Her legs shook, but she stood tall. She said the name they used was hers once and that it belonged to grief and a life already buried. She said she had broken no law. She said she had worked honest days and asked for nothing but a place to stand. She said any man who tried to take her would have to answer to her, not just to him. The children huddled closer to the wagon, eyes wide, trusting without understanding. That trust hardened the rancher's resolve. He took a single step forward and laid his gun on the wagon seat, not as surrender, but as truth. He said he would not be drawn into blood. He said he would be heard. The moment stretched thin. Wind lifted dust and carried it between them like smoke. The riders shifted, uneasy now. They had come expecting fear. They found it, but they also found something else. From the road came hoofbeats, fast and sure. The older native man from the trading post rode into view, alone. He raised a hand and spoke calmly, naming the land as it had been named long before fences. He spoke of water rights, of witnesses, of a promise kept by the rancher when others broke theirs. He said the woman's past was known to him and it carried no shame. He said truth had a longer memory than lies. Behind him, townsfolk appeared at a distance, drawn by the sound and the stillness. Among them was the woman from the boarding house, then the hired hand, then others who had watched and wondered. The sheriff arrived last, his horse lathered, his face tight. The rancher met the sheriff's eyes and told the whole of it. He spoke plain. He said there were men stealing cattle and men stirring fear to cover it. He said the rider had been seen near the missing stock. He said the woman had been threatened, and that threat would be answered by daylight, not whispers. The sheriff looked around and saw he was not alone in the moment. He saw the faces, the listening. He saw the older native man waiting without hurry. He saw the riders losing their easy smiles. The sheriff ordered the men to leave. He said there would be questions later and witnesses would speak. The rider protested once, then thought better of it. He turned his horse and rode off, the others following, dust swallowing their retreat. When the land fell quiet again, the woman sagged, strength spent. The rancher caught her and held her close. This time he did not pull away. He rested his forehead against hers, breathing in, breathing out, the world narrowing to what remained. They returned to the ranch together. The children slept in the wagon and were carried inside one by one, laid down gently as if the night itself had asked for care. The house felt different now, less spare, as if it had been waiting. In the days that followed, truth did its work. The stolen cattle were found, and the blame settled where it belonged. The sheriff came by with a quieter manner and an apology that did not ask for forgiveness. The older native man visited once more and shared bread at the table. He spoke of paths crossing and of choosing which ones to keep. The woman unpacked her suitcase and did not put it away again. She took work with purpose, learning the land, tending the garden, teaching the children letters by the window in the evening light. The rancher found himself laughing once, then again surprised each time. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she asked him why he had answered her question the way he did that first day. He took his time. He said he had heard fear in her voice and remembered his own. He said a house was more than walls. He said he had been lonely enough to recognize it. She took his hand, slow and sure. She said she would stay if he wanted her to. She said she was done running. He said he wanted her to stay. He said the land would be better for it, so would he. They did not rush the future. They let it come the way the seasons do, honest and earned. When winter eased and spring returned, the ranch stood greener. The town watched, then softened. A place at the table grew where there had been none. At dusk, they would stand on the porch and watch the light fade. The children would chase each other through the grass, their laughter lifting like birds. The wind would move through the land, no longer a warning, just a reminder. She asked once more where she would sleep, smiling now. he answered without hesitation. He said home,